So, update 6.7 is finally live. It's been live for 2 weeks already, and I'm back from my long sleep to discuss the new meta. You see, I've had time to stream this game during the new update, and I got a lot of questions regarding the new builds for survivors and killers. What can you play with right now? And this video will explain just that. I will explain my ideas on how I see the new survivor and killer meta and give examples of builds for survivors and each killer in the game. Will these builds be the best, the most optimized builds you can find on the internet? Well, they are close to that, but each of those builds can be tuned up to how you like to play this game, and this tuned build will be the one optimal for you. Of course, we cannot get away from our own experience and our own preferences. That's completely normal. Now, having said that, let's get into discussing survivor meta. And let's first start with the general trends I see. Well, the main concern for survivors, the main challenge is healing, especially self-healing. Basically, the only way to heal yourself right now is either through a medkit, which will be at least 24-second heal, or through self-care, which is a terrible perk that makes you heal something like 45 seconds, yeah, probably 45. And these options are not that great. You can, of course, use medkits to a certain level of success. You can have 2 heals, one of them will be automatic through syringe. However, I still find that that's not that good in the current meta. We have several issues. How to heal yourself, or maybe how to heal your team, then how to survive injured. That's something important. So the best perks right now, especially for solo players, are the perks that help you heal yourself, like Adrenaline, probably the single best perk for solo survivors right now, and perks that help you survive. Of course, exhaustion perks, Death Heart is still great, Life, Balanced Landing, although it's harder to use than Life, Sprint Burst, of course, those perks are still awesome, you still should run them. Windows of Opportunity is probably the second universally good perk right now. You should and probably even have to run it if you are a solo player. And then some perks that help you survive injured. Again, not exhaustion perks, just perks that help you when you're injured. First one is Resilience. Resilience is probably the single strongest perk to run, apart from exhaustions, if you want to stay injured and not be extremely vulnerable. The perk is great. Then what we have on ourselves is anti-tunnel perks such as Decisive Strike, the better opportunity in the face of Off the Record. If you are not running any exhaustion perks, you could run Iron Will, it will help you to a certain extent again. And finally, the last perk I cannot leave out is Distortion. Killers will run a lot of aura reading perks, and Distortion will save you from that, especially important when you are injured. Apart from perks that help yourself, you should probably run at least one perk that helps your team or helps progress the game in general and not just protects you. The best option would probably be Prove Thyself, the single best survivor perk right now. Next, what you can also run is perks that help you heal your teammates faster. These work really great right now, such as Botany Knowledge and Will Make It. Then again, perks that help progress the match in other ways, like Build to Last, that really helps you, but it helps you do the gens, which helps all the team. And finally, the perks that help your teammates when they are being tunneled or camped. Meaning, basically, Borrowed Time, still a great perk, even after the nerf, and Reassurance, probably the best team perk in the game. You should run them, definitely. Let's move on to the builds. And the first one is quite simple, it doesn't even have an exhaustion. Adrenaline, Resilience, Botany Knowledge, and Windows of Opportunity. Resilience and Windows help you stay injured and not be that vulnerable. I've had some decent success with these perks in solo survivor games. Adrenaline is a perk that will save your life when it's endgame, and finally, Botany Knowledge is a perk that lets you heal your teammates faster at any point of the match. It has a strong anti-synergy with medkits. Basically, if you pick Botany Knowledge and don't pick the best add-ons for the medkits, you cannot have 2 heals in the medkit. This is terrible probably, and if you want to run a medkit, I would suggest you run a different build or change this perk, swap Botany Knowledge with Will Make It. A bit more situational, but in general just a better opportunity for you, a better option for you. Moving on to the second build, well, probably it's better to call it a variation of this one. We swap out two perks, Resilience and Botany Knowledge. We are left with Adrenaline and Windows of Opportunity. I would say you almost have to run them. You must run them as a solo survivor. After that, you can first pick a medkit, Botany Knowledge doesn't stop you anymore, and then an exhaustion perk, for example Light, a strong choice for this build. Finally, the last perk would be a team perk. I would advise you run Prove Thyself, but you can choose any other one. Next build would be, again, almost the same, but the main focus for you will be to do gens fast. You swap Light with Sprint Burst to run away from the gens as late as possible, and then you pick yourself a toolbox, specifically the Onryo's toolbox, the green one, the strongest in the game, with two of its three best add-ons, either 2 charge add-ons or green charge plus brand new pad. And you could have guessed it already, the last perk here would be Build to Last, which will help you slam gens and get to that adrenaline faster. Now, with that, I would probably say that these are all the builds I have tested, but there is one more. And despite me running that build to a decent success as a solo survivor, I would not recommend that you try this, because this build looks as follows. Build to Last, Adrenaline, Unbreakable, and Deliverance. And the problem here is that this build is probably a bit more demanding in skill and cautiousness. You cannot get caught first, otherwise you have a dead slot. You have to utilize your Deliverance and not fuck up the game with it. This is important. However, I did really enjoy this build, it helped me a lot, probably was the best one I've tested so far, and if you are running with a friend or in a Swift even, this will be the go-to build for you. Now, there is one point I haven't discussed. Circle of Healing. Is it there? Should you run it? If you are a team, if you play with friends, you should. When you play in a team, you can utilize this perk to its fullest, it's probably even stronger than it was before. However, when you are a solo player, you will stumble across a certain problem. Survivors just don't run into Circle of Healing, they don't stay there. This looks like they almost don't care that they can be healed fast if they just wait for you. They don't do that, and more often than not, when tested as a solo player, this perk was just a dead slot that wasted my time while I was putting this item down, so probably no, you shouldn't run it. And with that, we have actually just finished with the survivor, let's move on to killers. And let's start with the general killer trends right now. All of the killers in the game can be divided into 3 categories. First one is normal M1 killers. They don't have any super strong mobility, super strong chase potential, they are just like straight up basic killers. Then the other type of the killer is a high chase, high mobility type killer, like Nurse, Blight, Hillbilly. These killers will be able to run different builds than the previous group. And finally, we have those, well, in Russian we call that Sborная солянка, meaning a complete mix of something that does not go well together. These are different killers with different traits, but with one main idea. They all have some gimmick with their power that either makes normal meta perks not go well with them, or makes some other perks that are usually straight up bad or just not as good as normal meta be much stronger on these specific killers. According to that, let me show you 3 build ideas, general build ideas for these groups. For normal killers, I would advise you go for Corrupt, then Deadlock, Jolt, and save the best for last. High mobility killers will benefit a lot from using information perks like Lethal Pursuer and Barbecue and Chili, and a strong anti-gen perk, with my case being Pop Goes the Weasel, works wonders with Chili. And well, the Solyankas, what can I say here? Each killer will need their own specific build, I will show that later. And now we move on to discussing each killer specifically. We start with the Trapper, the first killer in the game, the worst killer in the game. Trapper's got problems alongside with the cute face. What are the problems for Trapper? First one, he needs to set up a zone on a map and defend that area. He needs it, he cannot play any other way. He takes a lot of time to do that. He virtually cannot move away from that area once he's secured it, and he needs a lot of passive slowdown and some endgame help to win the game. first half of the match is something you do not play as Trapper, you only prepare for the real game in that time. So there is one build I've been running on him for something like a year and a half, and I truly believe this to be the best build on Trapper. Corrupt Intervention, Deadlock, No Way Out, and no one escapes death. This gives Trapper enough slowdown during the match and especially in the beginning of the game to set up his area, and then in the end game you have something solid to rely on and carry your games when you need them. With Noed it's actually quite funny. In Russia again we have a saying «Ман не может, Noed поможет», meaning literally that if a killer cannot win the game, Noed will do that for him. As much of a joke and a meme as it is, for Trapper this is the sad truth. He needs Noed to win his games. He needs it, he needs to play around it and plan to play around it. And having said that, we move on to the Wraith. Wraith is kind of a weird one. He's the stealth killer, probably the best stealth in the game. He's an M1 killer and he has some decent mobility. Here's the build for Wraith. Deadlock, Jolt, Sloppy Butcher and Stibiffle, save the best for last. Wraith is a stealth killer, as I've already mentioned, and he has a potential for early downs. This is something that, at least for me, happens pretty often on Wraith. So corrupts can be easily wasted, but then once survivors know that you are a Wraith, they start being more cautious and your next chases, second, third, fourth, take more and more time. Unless you clear out all of the map with your add-ons. I mean, get rid of all the pellets. So Deadlock is something that will really benefit this killer. Then it's an M1 killer, it can interrupt heals through his invisibility, through his stealth, so Sloppy goes amazing on him. Stibiffle, apart from being a great, incredibly strong perk overall, Stibiffle has a specific meaning on this killer. So how does your chase as Wraith go usually? You find a survivor, you uncloak, you get a hit, then you cloak back, get rid of the distance between you, close it, and then you uncloak and hit again, ideally. And Stibiffle helps you do just that. You get to a survivor, you uncloak, you hit, you recover from the hit faster, up to 40% faster, which means you cloak earlier, and then you close the distance faster, and the distance is smaller in itself. This is why I recommend this perk on Wraith. And the last perk is Chain Regression, Jolt. It's actually an amazing combo with Deadlock, because Jolt is the only perk in the entire game that regresses generators blocked by Deadlock. This combo is insane, I would say. It has some randomness to it, but generally really good one. And we move on to the next killer. The Hillbilly is our first high mobility, high chase killer, and this is the exact build that I have shown you previously. We run 3 perks that are probably universal for such type of killers, which are Lethal, Barbecue and Pop. And finally, the last perk is, in my opinion, a must-have on this killer. This is Bamboozle. Bamboozle really helps him with his chase, with his chainsaw, and you probably should always run this. Although I'm not a great Billy myself, this build works wonders for me in public games and I recommend that you try it. And for us, it's the next killer now, the Nurse. A Nurse has the same exact build idea. Lethal, Barbecue and Chili, Pop, and the last perk is Darkness Revealed. You could actually pick any other information perk or almost any other perk in the game for that last slot, but there is a reason why I picked Darkness Revealed. Usually people think that Nurse's hardest maps are the enclosed ones, RPD, Larry's, Gideon Midplant, and Darkness Revealed is a perk that works best on those types of maps. So this is why it's in the build. With it I've had some nice success, the only problem is basically cheaters. Don't go against cheaters and you'll be fine with this build. And next up is the Huntress, and the Huntress is the golden standard for those gimmicky type killers. In my former Huntress main experience, Huntress is a killer that relies and works best with perks that complement her power rather than are good in general. And you know, Huntress never was the best killer to run meta, like old Pop, old Ruin. She always had some problems with it due to the fact that she was and is a 4.4, a slow killer. But she always liked Corrupt Intervention, you could still run it on her right now. However, I would advise that you run another build. And you can see it right now. Deadlock, Darkness Revealed, Scorch Hook Pain Resonance, Scorch Hook Floods of Rage. Information is the single best thing for Huntress, especially when you are not extremely skilled, but also when you are an overwhelmingly high skilled player probably. You should run information on her, and Darkness Revealed is that gimmicky perk that works with her power extremely well. You get your headshots, you see survivors, you go into a chase. Huntress needs some type of passive slowdown, and same as with Wraith, you could have some extremely early downs, happens more often than not, so you probably should run Deadlock if you want only one passive slowdown type of perk. Finally, the combo of Scourges I really like on Huntress, and I have been running it on her since Sadiko's release. Before that, I just didn't have Floods of Rage to run. Pain Res is probably the single best perk for Huntress to regress gens somewhat actively, because she can walk around and kick them and utilize pop that effectively. And Floods of Rage just complement that use of Scorch Hooks. I really like this build. And we move on to the next killer. This is the Shape. And the Shape is kind of like Trapper. He has a terrible early game, he needs to really prepare for the game and get out of his tier 1 and not lose the game at that point. However, he is an M1 killer with insta-down power, and this is something you can play around. So let's get into the build. Corrupt Intervention, Save the Best for Last, No Way Out, and Jolt. And why do I recommend this build? You will never have a good early chase, you will never even have an early chase, you need to not lose 3 gens at the start of the game, so you have Corrupt for that. Then again, you're an M1 killer, so Save the Best for Last will go good for you. Jolt as well, each of your downs will be an M1 down, so Jolt will proc every time. Finally, No Way Out is a perk that, in my opinion, really helps the killer that can have an inst down in the end game, when the map is free of pellets and only thing survivors can rely on is windows. This is something you can play around as Shape, so No Way Out really helps carry the games here. And we move on to the next killer, the Hag. And Hag is just a better Trapper in my opinion. Like, straight up the better Trapper. So the build for her is pretty simple. Corrupt Intervention, Deadlock, Save the Best for Last, Sloppy Butcher. This is basically the build I have been running on Hag for more than a year now, and I truly believe for this to be the best build you can run on her. There's been only one slight change in this build. I've put in Sloppy Butcher and I removed Franklin's Demise. Why? Because Franklin's is no longer that good on her. You don't have to deal with medkits anymore, you don't have to deal with flashlights anymore, usually you can't deal with toolboxes anymore. Because they are gone by the time you find the survivor of the toolbox, so Sloppy just works much better. Survivors need to heal against the Hag, and this is what makes Sloppy so good. Pretty simple, pretty effective, and we move on to the Doctor. The Doctor is a killer I didn't really change my build for that much, and I've been running it for some time already. Deadman's Switch, a perfect fit for Doctor, the best perk on him, then Pain Resonance, Jolt, and Pop Goes the Weasel. And you see, this build actually has a problem. Scorch Hook Pain Resonance and Pop don't go well together. Why? Because Pop requires you to hit the most progressed gen, and Pain Res triggers on that most progressed gen, so you don't get the best out of Pop. For that reason, I would advise that you swap this perk out for Corrupt Intervention. Why? Because in my experience, Doctor is a killer that really needs some time, just some time, a minute or two, to build up his pressure, to spread out some madness, to secure his first chase. At least for me, that's almost never an easy one. And the build in general, you could just go with what I've shown you, add something like Sloppy to make healing a menace for survivors, add something like Stabuffle, always worked good on Doctor. Noyats, No Way Out will work just fine. And we move on to the next one, the Cannibal. And the build here is probably not what you could have expected. Bamboozle, Fearmonger, Tinkerer, and Pop Goes the Weasel. This build I find to be real good on this killer. Why is it so? Well, Bamboozle is a strong perk for the chainsaw killers. They really need it. A window is something that counters a Baba, so you need Bamboozle to prevent that. Why not be Corrupt on this killer, for example? Well, you see, Baba is an M1 insta-down killer, and more often than not you find out that your first chase is a survivor that you've caught somewhere off guard, and that was an extremely fast chase, so Corrupt is gone early and no value was received from it. However, the combo I'm showing you here is actually insanely strong on Baba. Again, this is an M2 insta-down killer. If you can find the survivor on a hot gen and knock them down, you can then hook them and use pop on that survivor. How do you know the hottest gen? Through Tinkerer. And how do you make sure you catch the survivor? Well, first Tinkerer, the undetectable, and second Fearmonger. If they have something like Sprint Burst, they cannot use that and they go down fast. Works wonders for me. You could of course resort to something more typical, more casual like Deadlock, but I really wouldn't recommend that. And we move on to the next killer, the Nightmare, Freddy Krueger. Freddy is a weird one. Let me show you the build first. I would recommend that you go with the following: Pop Goes the Weasel, Thrilling Tremors, Scorch Hook Pain Resonance, and Deadman's Switch. Why is this good on Freddy? Well, Freddy is bad every way except for one. If a perk works on generators, Freddy makes it look real strong. And this is just the case with Deadman's, an amazing fit for this killer, with Pop, and with Thrilling. Thrilling, I would say that is especially good here. Tremors help you a lot. How does this build work, basically? So, how this build works? You find a survivor, you catch them, you knock them down, and you carry them to the hook. While you do that, Thrilling Tremors show you which gens are being worked on at the moment. You hook a survivor, probably that was a Scorch Hook, the gen blocks, nice. Then there's probably one or two more gens that have some progress. And this is where your other perks come in. You know which gens you need through Tremors. You fake your teleport or just straight up teleport to that gen, you block it with Deadman's, then you go there, if you didn't teleport there, you pick some pellets, maybe give out some free hits, and then you use Pop on that gen. Can that be that Pop goes bad with Pain Res here? It can, it happens, so you can switch out this perk for something else. Sloppy, Noid, Jolts, No Way Out, Stubuffle will work wonders on Freddy. These are generally good perks for him. Could you pick Tinkerer? Oh yes, you could, and you probably even should. It also works great on him. Fearmonger, another great fit for Freddy. Personally, I think that Fearmonger is a hidden gem of this update, a hidden gem of the game overall. A generally strong, scary perk that is underused. But that's a topic for another discussion, and we move on to the next killer. This is the Pig. And the Pig, despite her being kind of one of the weakest killers in the game, has a pretty decent passive slowdown of the game. But for that slowdown to work, you actually need to secure at least one chase and put at least one reverse bear trap on a survivor's head. So you definitely need some slowdown in the game, in the beginning of the game, and then probably in the end game, because this is when your bear traps are either gone and or they just don't work. So this is the builds I've been using on a Pig, and I believe this is one of the best builds on her right now. Corrupt Intervention, Pain Res, Jolt, and No Way Out. You have your passive slowdown in the beginning for your first hook, your first bear trap, before the gen pops, then you have some active regression throughout the match, and finally you have No Way Out. Is there a problem for this build? Yes, there is. I've been testing this on stream on Midwich, and somehow Midwich is a great map for Pig's M2 attack, and a lot of my downs were through that attack, through the dash, and Jolt didn't do anything at all. You could swap it out for Deadlock, for Pop, it will still go amazing on Pig, I would probably recommend that you do it. However, I really like this build and I recommend this one. Next up is the Clown. And with Clown, the situation looks like this. People come to my streams, I talk about Clown, I say that Clown is a bad, weak killer. And people always ask me, why do I say that Clown is bad if he has some decent chase? Well, he doesn't have anything apart from that chase, but yes, his chase is pretty decent. For my build, I really like to play around this chase potential. So here is the build. Save the best for last, Deadlock, Jolt, Bamboozle. I find this build to be extremely good on Clown for a simple reason: it increases his chase potential by a lot. You block windows, when survivors get hit, they are usually under your toxins, they are slowed down and you recover faster using Save the Best for Last. Even on maps like Borgo, where I have tested this build, survivors just can't get away from you using Shift W. This is hard. And finally, two other perks help you to slow the game down and have your chases result in something nice. Deadlock to block the gens, and Jolts as something that worked with Deadlock and something that worked with Clown's knockdowns. They are always M1. However, as I already mentioned, I played this build on Borgo and I gotta be honest with you, Jolt procced like 2 or 3 times on one gen only. On huge maps, Jolt is terrible, and this is sad, and if you want, you can put any other perk instead of it. Probably Scorch Hook Pain Res or Pop. And from this point, we move on to the next killer. The Spirit. The Spirit is top 3 strongest killer in the game. She's just overall extremely powerful, and she's the strongest when she's chasing after an injured survivor. So the best perk on Spirit by far probably is Sloppy Butcher, and 3 other perks are just plain slowdown. Why not? You can run that on Spirit. That's Jolt, that's Deadlock, that's Scorch Hook Pain Res. Works wonders on her, I love this build. However, Spirit works wonders with almost any perk in the game. She can even run some stupid gimmicks like Sastruck and awhile, and this will still work wonders on her. But the most consistent build would probably be this one. We now move on to the Legion, and the Legion I find the Legion quite funny, because with them it's again the story we've already seen in the previous 6.1 new meta. There's one build that somehow arises the second time already, in my opinion. Thanatophobia, Corrupt Intervention, Hex Plaything and Hex Pentimento. This is a build I've succeeded doing 25 wins in a row with this killer back in the first week of 6.1 when Thana was insane. Now, when the healing is dead, this build is back again. It's extremely dirty and quite strong. The idea here is that you take your time with Corrupt and injure all of the survivors and keep them injured at all times. So doing gens becomes extremely slow and painful, or they are always oblivious and you have easy downs near the gens. Of course, this is a build that relies on add-ons. Probably the best one for that would be the Legion pin, and also a combination of Joy's Mixtape and Defaced Smiley pin. If you don't run those add-ons, you probably shouldn't run this build and instead resort to the second one. Hex Blood Favor, Jolt, Pain Res and Undying. Blood Favor is probably one of the best perks on Legion, because you can injure fast and then you can catch up to a survivor while Blood Favor still works and down them extremely fast. To protect that perk you have Hex Undying, although I've actually ran this build with different perks instead of Undying. It was still awesome. You could change that for Corrupt, for Deadlock, for No Way Out. Try it out, you'll love it. Then Jolt. This killer is an M1 type. Jolt will proc every time except for the 5-hit knock, but the M2 knock for Legion is something that happens once or twice in 5 games. I wouldn't think about it that much. And finally, Pain Res, the best regression in the game right now, works wonders as well, just because it's a plain good perk. And we move on to my main killer, the Plague. And the fun part here is that I've been testing the builds for this update unknowingly since January probably, yeah, since January. And I've got plenty of builds to show you here. I will show you my 4 favorite builds. The first build I will be showing you is Thanatophobia, Corrupt Intervention, Tinkerer, Pop Goes the Weasel. I've been running this build on Plague for a long time before 6.1 patch, and so how does this work? Corrupt gives you the time to infect all of the survivors, then all of them are infected, Thana is active, and one of the 2 things happens. First one, survivors start cleansing, second one is survivors don't cleanse and keep doing gens under the full Thana effect. And why is this so good? Because when Tinkerer procs on any gen, unless there are 3 or 4 people on that gen, you can go to that gen and be there in time for your undetectable to end and to get an easy down, after which you can proc Pop Goes the Weasel. The problem with this build is that I recommend that you run it with some specific add-ons. The Prayer Tablet Fragment, an extremely powerful meme add-on for Plague, as well as Hematite Seal. When you combine these two add-ons with this build, it is an incredible tool to win games. If you remove those add-ons, especially the tablet fragments, still nice, but not that good at all. At least not better than the next builds I will show you that do not rely on add-ons. First one is as follows: Bamboozle, Discordance, Deadlock, No Way Out. This is a straight up passive slowdown build for Plague with one information source, being Discordance. Discordance is strong on Plague because when you find several survivors, you puke on all of them, you infect all of them, and this gets you a long way with this killer, especially knowing that after you've done that, you pick one target, you infect them and down them immediately. Now, next build. I wouldn't call it my signature build, because I've seen other strong Plagues run it, but that's just because the build is real nice and intuitive on her. First one is Corrupt Intervention, then we have the best perk for the Plague by far, Blood Favor, accompanied by Pain Res and Deadlock. This build actually originated before the 6.7 patch, but it still works nice. You can pair it with Infected Emetic and Rubbing Oil, probably the best add-ons for this build, but in general it doesn't rely on add-ons that much, you can run anything with it. The idea here is that Blood Favor gives you an extremely fast early chase or even several chases. If that happens, you are now set for a win. Plague's problem is that she needs time to prepare for the game, to get the infections going, and then she's an M1 killer unless she drinks from her fountains. Blood Favor makes those first chases much easier, which is amazing. And then we have passive and active slowdown, which helps Plague as well. The perk that looks weird here, knowing that first chases are often really short, is Corrupt Intervention. The reason as to why I have this perk here is because I've been running this build and I've been preparing this build for a custom tournament that we've held recently. And there I knew I wouldn't have any easy chases if the map wasn't the best map for the Plague. For public games, I would advise that you pick either something that helps you slow down the game even more, or No Way Out, which would be straight up a better alternative. And now for the last build on the Plague. This is an extremely dirty build that unfortunately has to be run with one of her rarest and strongest add-ons, Black Incense. Hex Blood Favor, Hex Plating, Hex Undying, Hex Pentimento. So this is how the build works. You need to infect all of the survivors, and you will do that eventually, and Hex Blood Favor will give you a strong early chase. After that you have hooked a survivor and they are now oblivious to you. And this is dangerous, because they do not hear your terror radius and you see them at all times if they are still infected. An extremely mean build on Plague that unfortunately relies on Black Incense. Also, you could swap out Blood Favor for any other perk of your preference. I personally tried to run this with Lethal Pursuer and it was nice, but I just love Blood Favor a lot on Plague. And we move on to the Ghostface. And the Ghostface, the Ghostface suffers a lot. There are some maps you can't use your power on, like the Swamp. There are some maps you can use your power on, but you will be seen from a mile away, like Borgo. And in general, the Ghostface's position in the meta is not that good. So here's the build that I propose for you. Save the best for last, Jolt, No Way Out, Discordance. Discordance is really strong on this killer because if you somehow find several survivors in one spot, you can mark them all or 99 them all, and this is a recipe for disaster for survivors. Then Stubifol is a strong perk, it wins me games on M1 killers, and Ghostface can actually save his stacks through one-shot hits. Amazing thing. Jolt works well with M1 hits and all of the Ghostface's hits are M1s. Finally, No Way Out. Well, for no reason in particular, I just love this perk. You could swap it out for Corrupt, for Deadlock, for something that you deem better. And I would understand that completely. Why not? You should probably try it. Again, tune these builds for yourself the way you find the best for you. And we move on to the Demogorgon. And a heads up, I'm not a good demo player. I barely touch him and I find myself in a weird situation. You see, there are 3 killers in the game that are M2 killers, and despite this, a lot of people advise that you run Stubifol on them. Those are Demo, Nemesis and the Pyramid Head. When we are talking about the Nemesis and the Pyramid Head, these are the two killers I've invested a lot of time into, and I even have guides in Russian on those killers. You could try and watch them. I will link them down in the description. People say that auto-translate to English is quite good on those videos. However, the idea is that I'm a strong opponent of running Stebuffle on those killers. They don't need it. They are strong M2 guys. This perk doesn't help them that much. But with the Demogorgon, I'm just probably terrible at using his power, so Stebuffle helps me a lot. And apart from Stebuffle, I run these three perks: Deadlock, Corrupt Intervention, and Scorch Hook Pain Res. Why do I run Corrupt in this build? Because in my opinion, if you want to use Demo to the fullest, you need to use his portals, and you need to set them up, and this takes quite the time. Probably the same time as the Trapper needs to set up his area. Of course, this build can be tuned, and if there are some demo mains watching this video, I would love to hear your input on the idea. And here we move on to the Oni. Oni is a high chase potential, high mobility killer, same as Nurse, as Blight, as Billy. However, the build for him is quite different. Hex Blood Fever, Deadlock, Sloppy Butcher, Infectious Fright. This build works around two ideas. First one, Oni really needs the time to get his first injuries and to get his power. Then his power is incredibly strong, and using it multiple times per one cast, downing several survivors, is the way to play the Oni. And Sloppy Butcher is the perk that helps you. You need to keep survivors injured, you need to gain blood constantly. Sloppy does just that for you. Deadlock finally is just an overall solid force float. I didn't know what to put here, so I used Deadlock. The concern that has been voiced when we've been testing this build is Blood Fever. Why would you want to run Blood Fever on Oni? Does it help that much? For me, it does. Of course, it's always better to find two survivors and injure two people, so you could actually run something like Discordance on this killer. However, if that doesn't happen, if you find one survivor, why should you go somewhere to find other people and not finish the chase as an M1 killer? For that purpose, I run Blood Fever. Again, you could swap it for Discordance, you could swap it for Corrupt, it could work better, I just love this more. The build is strong, I succeed a lot with this build on Oni, and this concludes our story. Let's move on to the Deathslinger. Okay, for Slinger I have an English guide, and in that guide all of the ideas about his build's crafting are still viable. And the one build I would recommend that you run on him as his best build right now is the following: Deadlock, Jolt, save the best for last, Sloppy Butcher. The thing is that I've got a confirmation from my friends and a Slinger main that this is a real strong build on him, and I've tested it myself and I love it. Slinger is a strict M1 killer, all of his downs are M1 downs, so Sloppy works amazing, it helps you keep people injured. Save the best for last helps you a lot with your chase, with your gun. You can hit a survivor, then aim, then reel, then hit again. You can hit a survivor after reeling him. Stebuffle is an overall strong perk for him, and Jolt, well, I don't know if there is any other killer that works with Jolt as good as Slinger. Survivors can be reeled into a place where you can trigger Jolt with a guarantee. And this is why this perk is so good on Slinger. You can and you will do that, and you will make sure that you proc it. Again, it works wonders with Deadlock, so why not? Try it out, you will love it. Maybe one day I will love Slinger as well. No, probably never. Now we move on to the Executioner. Executioner is one of my favorite killers, and I will show you 3 builds for him. First one, this one is my signature build on him. It's a Hex type build, based around Hex Retribution, accompanied with Undying, Plaything and Pentimento. This build is literally my favorite, it's probably the best build I could run on Pyramid Head, and I advise you to try it. It's fun, it's strong, it's consistent. This build works around the amount of aura read and oblivious that survivors have on them if they start interacting with you. And it gives you a lot of fun and potential. However, this build has one significant problem. It relies on your ability to end chases fast. If your first chases go terribly wrong, the build will not help you later, and you will lose the game. And in that case, you would probably want something other than that. I would advise that you go for No Way Out, Deadlock, Hex Blood Favor and Corrupt Intervention. Pyramid Head is a killer that works best when you play the dirtiest. When you find a survivor, you torment them, then you hook them, you tunnel them off hook, you cage them and you finish them off from the cage. And for that you first need a strong early chase, Corrupt helps, Blood Favor helps even more, and then you need something to help you throughout the match to not think about gens. For that reason I'm running Deadlock and No Way Out. Generally strong, consistent builds, I love it. And finally, Pyramid Head is a gimmick type killer. His power doesn't work that well with hooks for the simple reason you don't always want to hook people. If you can, you want to kill them on the spot when they are tormented and onto hooks. If you can, you want to cage them on their second hooks. The only time you don't really want to hook them is when this is their first hook and they are tormented. Then you can tunnel them off hook and then cage them and then finish them off much faster, much quicker. So I never really advised that people run Pain Res on this killer, but now Pain Res is different and it actually works wonders on him. Another thing Pyramid Head is strong about is camping the basement. It's really hard to get out of a basement if a Pyramid Head decides that he will just wait for you there. So the builds I have tried on stream and we've had a lot of cruel fun with it is the following: Pain Res, Agitation, Monstrous Shrine, Fearmonger. The idea is that you hook a survivor in a basement, there are scorch hooks there, Pain Res procs, then someone goes down, they unhook, you do your hits, you start tunneling, caging and repeating the process. And Fearmonger, actually you could put anything else. Corrupt, Deadlock, No Way Out, why not? I just love Fearmonger. That's probably the only reason this perk is there. Having said that, next up is the Blight. The Blight is another mobility type killer, and the build I would advise you run on him is the same three perks: Lethal, Pop and Barbecue, accompanied by Nowhere to Hide. Out of all the mobility type killers, I believe that Blight is the best to utilize Nowhere to Hide on for the simple reason: Blight has the least downtime between kicking a gen and using his power for movement. You do that instantly, you don't have to hold your blink, you don't have to do your chain, so you just straight up press a button and go. For that reason, Nowhere to Hide works wonders on this killer. Try it, you'll love it. Moving on, the Twins. And somehow, Twins gave me probably the least amount of problems in build crafting, despite the fact that the last time I played them was 8 or 9 months ago when I wanted to learn them and create a guide on them. I just dropped them, I didn't like their state at the time and didn't play them ever since. I don't like Twins. But my understanding of this killer is the following. First one, they just don't go well with most perks. For the simple reason, Victor doesn't show you auras and doesn't trigger most things in the game. Then, Twins want to slug people a lot. They probably want to slug even more than hook, and in the early days of Twins, Dowsy has shown that through his 204k win streak as Twins when he's been slugging people left and right. And so this is the build I advise that you run on Twins: Corrupt Intervention, Deadlock, Sloppy Butcher, Forced Penance. The idea is pretty simple. You take your time to injure people with Charlotte, while Corrupt blocks the gens, they get under Sloppy, and then you use Victor to slug everyone. If they try to do gens, you have Deadlock, it prevents them from doing it that effectively. Finally, Forced Penance is a weird perk. If you don't know what that does, it's quite simple. When a survivor takes a protective hit, that's almost anything close to another survivor or to a carried or hooked survivor, they get broken for 80 seconds. That's 80 seconds when a survivor will always be injured. And then add to that at least 8 seconds of heal, and in reality much more than that. Forced Penance will not work in case survivors do not group up, do not try to be altruistic and help each other against twins. However, the strongest survivors will group up, will try to heal somewhere inside of a bone circle of healing, will try to take hits for each other, will try to play in pairs. That's how twins should be counted. Force penance helps you in that exact situation. Probably not that common in public games, but once you've encountered that situation, you feel the weight of it all, and it really helps you a lot. Also, Force penance is triggered by Victor, which is amazing. One perk that can be triggered through Victor hits. Mwah. So good. Moving on to the Trickster. And the Trickster is... well, how do I describe it even? Trickster is basically a nerfed Huntress. He has all the same problems, all the same bad synergies, but he also doesn't have any good synergies with Aura Read, because when you see a survivor as Trickster through auras, that doesn't result in a hit. That results in a chase, probably a lengthy one. Why even bother? The build that worked for me was Corrupt Intervention, No Way Out, Deadlock and Pain Resonance. Literally the best build for Trickster right now, probably. And so we move on to the Nemesis. I believe that the Nemesis is a killer that got the worst fortune in this update, because now all of the builds that I recommended in my Russian guide are obsolete. They were based on Scorch Hook Pain Res and Deadman's one build, and the second one on Eruption and Call of Brine. None of this works right now, it doesn't really help him that much, though, so the build is completely different. Corrupt Intervention, Discordance, Tinkerer and Pop. Why do you use this? You need Corrupt to get yourself the time to stack up your tier 2 at least, or even tier 3 sometimes. Then Discordance helps you do that, helps you find several survivors and get your hits, infections and tier 2 faster. Then the last two perks are Tinkerer and Pop. Information on a hot gen, plus your ability to regress that gen with Pop. This works real good. The problem was, however, that despite having to test this build on Mother's Dwelling, I really enjoyed the benefits of it, and I would recommend that you try this one. And we move on to the Cenobite. The Cenobite is one of my favorite killers. I've done a huge half-an-hour guide on him, again in Russian, you could try to watch it. But the idea is the following. Somehow this killer, throughout all the nerfs, didn't struggle that much with perks. Right now, I would advise you run the following build. Stabiffle, Sloppy Butcher, Deadlock and Pain Res. Could you remove something from this build? Could you change it? Could you put in Hoarder? Yes, probably you should remove Sloppy. In my experience, this didn't work as consistently as I would have wanted it. So probably Hoarder would be a better option for Pinhead. And we move on to the next killer, the Artist. Oh, and I was so afraid about Artist builds, because the strongest builds I ran used, you got it right, Deadman's Switch and Pain Res. An insane, the strongest combo on Artist. Till this day, despite the nerfs to Pain Res, the build is still extremely powerful and viable. Discordance, Pain Res, Deadman's, No Way Out. Why I love this build? It's easy. Discordance tells you where survivors are, you can harass them with birds, you can get free hits on them using the slingshot technique. Deadman's is a perk that lets you block the chance that survivors are on, or hit the survivors when they know there's Deadman's and they just wanna finish the gen. This combo won me games, one after another after another. No Way Out is just a solid option to finish the game off, however, one of the concerns that people voice about this perk is that it can be stealthed out. And to be honest with you, in the footage I am showing you here, in the end game people did stealth it out and the game resulted in a draw. Anyway, the build is still powerful, still good. Try it, run it, you'll love it. However, there is another build I really love on Artist, and it's Noet time! Yeah, literally. Lethal Pursuer, Barbecue and Chili, No Way Out, No One Escapes Death. A build I've been running on Artist since her release, and I love it. It lets me focus on one or two survivors, get rid of them, and then finish off the remainder with No One Escapes Death and No Way Out working together in tandem. Amazing stuff. Having said that, the Onryo. sad. I'm sad here. I'm just sad. Sadako is in a desperate need for a rework, a complete one. She doesn't have anything. Her stealth is kinda bad, her chase is terrible, her mobility is non-existent. Why do I say that? Because when you teleport to your TV, it turns off for 100 seconds, compared to when survivors turn your TVs off, 60 seconds. Why is that? So basically, Sadako is usually run by enthusiasts with the eerie add-on that resets the TVs once you've hit a survivor out of your face. Sadako gave me a lot of trouble with the build, and the idea here is that she doesn't have any good early chases, also she doesn't have any mid-game chases, also she doesn't have any real mobility. So the build is as follows: Corrupt Intervention, Deadlock, Jolt, and finally Stubbifull. Why do you want this? Stubbifull helps you in a chase, Deadlock and Corrupt help you with the pressure and with your slow chases. They just buy you time. And Jolt lets you regress the gens. Again, the combo with Deadlock. I tried running other perks, like Pop, worked terribly, Pain Res worked quite nice, but I still love Jolt more. You could also run Noir instead of something from this build and No Way Out, and this will work on Sadako just fine. She is a killer that can utilize Noir and can rely on it a lot. And we move on to the Dredge. The Dredge, or as I like to call him, Sadako on steroids, is a killer that has nice chase potential alongside with M1 hits, and also he's got incredibly good mobility compared to many other killers in the game. And this lets him run a variation of a build I've shown you for Blight, Billy and Nurse. Sloppy Butcher, Pop, Darkness Revealed, Barbecue and Chili. Why do I suggest this build? First one is Sloppy. Sloppy is incredibly good on him for the simple reason Dredge is reliant heavily on keeping survivors injured. That helps build up his night. Then he has enough mobility to use information from Chili to go on the right gen and use Pop there. And finally, Darkness Revealed is a perk that works well with a killer that works well with lockers. You could swap it out for something else, but I love it as it is. Moving on to the Mastermind. Wesker is one of my least favorite killers in the game, but luckily for me, I've got a friend that is extremely good with him. He's invested a lot of time in him. And even during the 6.7 PTB, I've played against him with a team and we could see a build that is weird as fuck, yet it was extremely oppressive on Wesker. So first let me show you the build, then write into the comments how stupid I really am, and then we'll discuss it. The build: Fearmonger, Call of Brine, Sloppy Butcher, Overcharge. Now the comments and now the explanation. Wesker is a high mobility killer with a strong chase and with one other factor that most killers in the game don't have. He's got his own passive slowdown, a secondary objective that survivors have to do in order to not lose the game completely, getting rid of his infection. And now how does this actually work? You find yourself your good, nice, strong gens, you run around, you hit survivors with your power or with your M1, then they are under Sloppy, and you kick those gens. It will be extremely stupid of survivors to stay on gens with Fearmonger against Wesker injured, so they will have to get rid of their infection, they will have to heal, and this will give you time to utilize Call of Brine and Overcharge. Is this combo any good? No. These perks together are terrible. Even together, even combined into one perk, they are still less than a full perk. Does it work on Wesker? For some weird reason, it does. Could you change this build somehow? Yeah, definitely. Another build I love on Wesker is Corrupt Intervention, Bamboozle, No Way Out and Deadlock. Also works nice on him. And we move on to my second main killer, the Knight. I've invested quite the time in this killer since his release, and I even succeeded to make a win streak north of 40 wins in a row on him. This is probably my strongest, my most resultive killer, and what can I say? Knight is a strict M1 killer. He does not rely on his guards to hit people, he relies on himself to do that, and guards are a tool to waste survivors' time, to break pallets, to hit gens, to corner people in the night. So the build I recommend that you use right now is the following: Pain Res, Deadman's Switch, Save the Best for Last, Sloppy Butcher. This is the core of my win streak build, meaning Pain Res and Deadman's, with 2 perks that help Knight a lot because he's an M1 killer. If something feels wrong with this build for you, there are several things that can be done here. First one, Fearmonger. Fearmonger is the second perk that I found incredibly powerful during my win streak. It's actually been in that build and it helps in the current meta a lot. You can also use Noir on this killer, Jolt will work wonders on him, No Way Out will work wonders on him. On some maps, on some occasions, Corrupt Intervention would be an option. However, in my experience, Knight is extremely oppressive in chase and his early chases are almost always extremely fast, so I don't recommend Corrupt on him. And having said that, we are moving on to the last killer in the game, the Skull Merchant. Here I've got 2 builds for you. One is basically the dull merchant, the effective, boring, consistent playstyle. What's the problem with Skull Merchant? She is strong at holding 3 gens, but there are no perks to do that, and eventually, if you cannot hold your 3 gens, you have to be good at chase and down people, otherwise you can't win the game. So what you have in this build is first Brown Noise Generator, an extremely oppressive add-on for this playstyle, and then all perks that help you in chase somehow, that help you catch people. Bamboozle, Fearmonger, Save the Best for Last, Sloppy Butcher. The idea here is that you find oblivious survivors on gens, have an easier chase with Stabuffle and Bamboozle, and then if they are injured, they have to heal in order to get back on gens, because otherwise it will be extremely dangerous. With this build, the games go for 20 minutes, as usual for Skull Merchant. They are extremely boring, I almost fall asleep during them, and I try to just not use this build unless I need the footage. But it's consistent, it's effective. If you like this playstyle, go for it and never come back. But there is also another build. Actually, just yesterday I've been doing archives with this build and people loved it. People told me that they loved this build, that this was different, that I didn't hit gens and this was nice. And I myself enjoy this build a lot, actually. This is the fun way to play Skull Merchant. And this is a Hex type build. Blood Favor, Undying, Devour Hope, Haunted Ground. This build is based around Devour Hope. You need to stack it, you need to down people, you need to hook them separately, and you need your stacks. Then this build becomes extremely oppressive, it's hard to get rid of all of the hexes on the map, and another problem while getting rid of the hexes is Haunted Ground. An injured survivor is nice, as we've seen in the previous build, so a one-shot survivor is even better. And Blood Favor just helps you with your chases, and if you down a survivor under a pellet, you have a guaranteed pickup without any fear of getting hit by a pellet and survivor being rescued by his teammates. Generally a fun build, please try it. You will see that Skull Merchant can be fun and interactive with the game, with the map, with the people. Also, it doesn't really rely on add-ons that much, so you can run it with virtually anything. Try it, you'll love it, I promise you. And having said that, someone opened the door, probably my cats. And we have concluded our Dance Macabre. Macabre? How is it pronounced? Dance Macabre? Probably, yeah, something like that, I guess. Anyway, the video is over. If you have watched up to this point, please like, subscribe. I'll have more content for you, especially in summer when my diploma is over, when I'm a free man. And wait for the new video. We will probably discuss the new buy builds for each of the killers in the game. My name's Hydro, and I'll see you in the next one.